If you're looking at the modern SVR or FSB, which are just two different organizations that used to be part of the one big KGB, or the KGB or its predecessors, the Cheka, you're really going back to the late 19th century and the Imperial Russian Intelligence Security Service, generally known as the Okhrana or Okranka. It's really the Department of Police and the Special Corps of Gendarmes. Their primary job was protecting the imperial regime and protecting it against imperial, or rather interior enemies, revolutionaries for the most part. And they got very, very good at that. By co-opting people within those movements, infiltrating and recruiting informers, agent provocateurs. In fact, they excelled at the agent provocateur. Person you place inside an organization to cause trouble, usually maneuver them into a position of leadership, and they provoke actions that can then allow you to crack down on them. That is, many sort of lure or bring the target organization into any legal or open status that it can be more effectively suppressed. They were very good at that. So good that by the early 20th century, in the years preceding the Russian Revolution in 1917, they had effectively infiltrated every radical party, Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, SRs, great and small, and placed people in positions of influence and leadership. To the point that arguably, that is, you can debate this, but I think in the whole, they could largely dictate what those parties did. Nothing was discussed at any central committee meeting of any revolutionary group that the Okhrana wasn't immediately aware of. And they often had people in positions to influence what those decisions were. Of course, that raises an interesting question, is that if they were that good and they had infiltrated and effectively controlled most of the opposition, then how did the regime get overthrown by revolutionaries? The answer to that is that it wasn't overthrown by revolutionaries. It was overthrown by politicians. That would then take us into a detour into Russian history, but I'll just leave it with this. If you look at 1917 and you look closely, this is one of the things I would always tell my students, is that there are two Russian revolutions in 1917. There's the first one in March or February, depending on your calendar, that overthrows Nicholas II. Revolutionaries are really not involved with that. Bolsheviks are nowhere to be seen. Trotsky and Lenin are nowhere to be seen. They have nothing to do with that. That has to do effectively with a political conspiracy within the Russian parliament, the Duma, to unseat an emperor they thought was, bungling the war and was essentially a loser to begin with. And it was a coup d'etat, a parliamentary coup d'etat. The temporary or provisional government that revolution put in power was the one overthrown by Lenin 8 months later. And that government was essentially one dominated by moderate socialists. It was a government that very quickly sort of turned to the left. The guy we associate with that is Alexander Kerensky. Alexander Kerensky was a Russian socialist, a politician. He was the quasi-dictator of that regime. He's the person, not the Tsar, who's overthrown by Lenin. So the revolutionaries, they did not prove to be the fatal threat to the Tsarist regime. It was the Tsarist political system itself that did that.